Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News for this Wednesday, the 9th day of April, 2025. And as always, more stories have come across the wire that are miraculously setting the stage, just as the Bible predicted, with the players lining up for the events that will take place at the end of the present age before the second coming of Jesus Christ and the events that are predicted to precede it. So let's look at them. First of all, Israel Katz, the defense minister of the nation of Israel, has given Hamas an ultimatum. The IDF will now move to intense combat in all of Gaza. In fact, our friend David Tal today, who's back in Israel, David uh, basically told us today that Israel has 5 divisions. He's seen them, seen the tanks all lined up waiting to enter into Gaza. So they're getting very, very serious. What they're doing, they're dividing Gaza into 3 different pieces right now. And it's kind of the old divide and conquer. And more and more ground is taken over by the Israelis, less and less again above ground with Gaza. Now, part of the problem, though, is our next story. About 75% of the tunnels in Gaza are still not destroyed. They keep giving new figures out because they find more and more tunnels. We mentioned about a year ago when Israel first entered into Gaza, they thought there was like 100 miles of tunnels underneath the city. They were sadly mistaken. Then they changed it to 500 miles of tunnels and seems to be even more than that. So there's a lot of work still to be done, and Israel is on the march doing it. So we'll keep an eye on that. Now, piggybacking on a story we did earlier today, Donald Trump mentioned or recalled that there's countries interested in taking in Gazans, which would be a huge help in ending the war there and getting rid of Hamas. Well, Netanyahu now specifically told his cabinet today that 2 countries are in progress in negotiations now to absorb the Gazans, 2 huge countries. So this would be a tremendous help in getting the war over and making it easier to rid Gaza from the scourge of Hamas. So again, this is good confirmation. Now, our fourth story is not a headline, as it were. It's some intel I got from our friend Nauder. For those of you who are new, we've had about 1,600 new subscribers in the last 28 days. So I've mentioned the name of Nauder before. He is an Iranian Christian who is got a tremendous background. His dad was a high official in the Shah of Iran's government. He was a very extremely wealthy, spoiled brat kid. They had to leave the country when the Ayatollah took over, was a Muslim, then became an atheist, came to America and became a Bible-believing Christian. And he's working with the underground churches around the world. He's done a tremendous job getting the gospel out. And he has intel that he's told me this for years and years. And it always turns out to be true sooner or later what he tells me is happening. And so he's got a story now about what Iran is doing. They're using Chinese ships, some of their containers, some of their tankers as launch pads, and they're moving them towards Diego Garcia, the island there in the Indian Ocean, and they need to be eliminated. He said this is actionable intel that these ships have been turned into launch pads and they're moving towards Diego Garcia. But he said they're like Stone Age compared to what types of weapons we have. But Iran does not have a navy. Iran is very pathetic now at this particular time with respect to much of their defenses, their air defenses, and lack of a navy. But he said this is a story that it just hit social media 2 days ago, and so we'll talk about that. So things, boy, let me tell you, really heating up. And finally, this one story here is chilling. A German journalist was given a 7-month sentence for why putting together a meme that mocked the government's hatred of free speech. 7 months in jail for doing what? Just putting a meme, posting a meme that mocked the German government's hatred of free speech, which obviously they do because they wouldn't give someone a 7-month sentence if they didn't hate free speech. So anyway, this is where Europe's going. This is where China already is, and much of the world will move towards that. As we've talked about, at the end of the age, it'll be control, control, control by the governments, particularly there in Europe, when headed eventually by the final Antichrist. And so we're not surprised to see this. So basically, what we continue to see here every day from so many different areas. That's why we emphasize our book, 25 Signs. We're near the end. We have signs with respect to globalism. We have signs with respect to the world desperately looking for a leader, that the United States is not a player in last days Bible prophecy, but Russia hugely is, and Iran is not the power that it is now. So all these things are falling into place, just as the Bible said they were. Okay, let's get to them. Katz's ultimatum for Hamas. Headline number one, the IDF will move to intense combat in all of Gaza. The Minister of Defense Israel Katz visited the Morag Corridor in the Gaza Strip and turned to the Gazan population and said, "Get rid of Hamas, return the hostages. This is the only way to stop the war." What they're doing, though, they've divided the country basically into three sections. That is that the area of Gaza, and it's divide and conquer. They're again squeezing Hamas in more and more and more by this division. They're keeping people from moving from one area to the next. They're checking out the IDs, and so they know who the real citizens are and who the Hamas terrorists are. But Hamas is told by Israel Katz, get rid of Hamas, or return the hostages, or else the war will not be stopped. Minister of Defense, he visited this corridor today, together with the commanding officer of the Southern Command and the commander of the 36th Division and other commanders. During the visit, the commanders in the field briefed the defense minister on IDF operations in the area and progress on its seizure while they're taking more land. Kott said this: I came here today to support the commanders and soldiers of the Israeli Defense Force who are fighting with determination to free the hostages and hurt Hamas's strength. The IDF is eliminating terrorists, locating and eliminating terrorist infrastructure, and dividing the Gaza Strip, even in places like the Morag Corridor, where we haven't operated in the past. The Gazan population is leaving the combat zones, and this is why it's key. And many territories are being seized and added to the state of Israel's security zone. So he says Gaza is being left smaller and isolated. If Hamas continues to refuse to release the hostages soon, the IDF will move to intense combat in all of Gaza until all the hostages are released and Hamas is defeated. And at the same time, he said, we're working to advance a program of voluntary immigration for the residents of Gaza in line with the U.S. president's vision, which we are all working to implement. So he says, I turn to the residents of Gaza, get rid of Hamas, return the hostages, the only way to stop the war. And as we said, David Tal, report from Israel today, 5 divisions are ready to go. And he saw the tanks all line up into Gaza. They're very, very serious. Now, one of the problems Israel continues to find, the extent the tunnels underneath are a lot more extensive than thought. Around 75% of Hamas's tunnels in Gaza have not been destroyed yet by the IDF. This is from security sources that said a significant number of smuggling tunnels also crossing from Egypt to the Gaza Strip are still intact. So they're still finding these tunnels. It's amazing what they've done there. So they've only destroyed about a quarter of Hamas's tunnels in Gaza, the security sources said. So there's a significant number still left. They're still smuggling weapons into Israel, even though the Philadelphia corridor, which is the corridor between Gaza and Egypt, has been taken over by the Israelis because there's still tunnels underneath. Even though they've found a lot of them, they're still there. So it's incredible, like we said, what the work that they still have to do. Katz said, I saw with my own eyes quite a few tunnels crossing to Egypt. Some were closed and several were open. We had information that Hamas was planning to attack soldiers and settlements during the ceasefire. And so they're using these tunnels. Now, interesting, our commentator, we like to quote Larry Goldstein from the Jerusalem Post. Larry writes these, he writes comments about every article in the J Post, and they're excellent comments. And I like what he said today. I love quoting him. He says, one begins to wonder if the Army has any idea what they're doing. Over the past 18 months, we've heard estimates of a third, 50%, 60%, and now down to 25% of the tunnels that have been taken over by the Israelis. Does the Army even know? In any case, holding the border at ground level is essential to stop the weapons flow, but obviously not enough. And that's so true. They got to find these tunnels and destroy them. And this is going to take time. It's going to take several years to get it all completely finished. But it can be, for the most part, done hopefully before that, before years pass. In other words, Hamas can be neutralized to the place where they're basically no longer a real threat against Israel. But it's going to be years before you get rid of all of them. That's the whole point. But a lot of work still needs to be done is the bottom line of all this. Now, in a great story, Netanyahu, from the Jerusalem Post, said to the cabinet today, negotiations are actually underway with 2 countries to absorb the Gazans. That's the directions things need to go. Following his U.S. visit regarding discussions with countries about the possibility of absorbing a large number of the citizens of Gaza, Netanyahu told the Security Cabinet that negotiations underway with two large countries to absorb large numbers of Gazans who will immigrate voluntarily. They're not throwing anybody out. As we've said, most of them want to leave. He said Israel knew in advance that the U.S. talks with Iran regarding its nuclear program that where they were going to happen, and the U.S. wanted to know what a good agreement was from Israel's perspective. And the prime minister said there is goodwill in the U.S. to reach a solution on the issue of tariffs, and Israel is committed to reducing the trade deficit with the U.S. But the real issue of course, Iran, what needs to be done, and their nuclear program needs to be dismantled, or at least set back years and years and years. All right, so that's the good news, and so they're moving forward. Now, our fourth headline, like we said, is not a headline. It's from our friend Nauder. He, like I said, gives me a lot of intel with what's going on. He's literally in the know for a number of reasons, what he does in the world. And he said Iran has actually been using Chinese ships as launch pads, and some of the containers and the ships in these containers they're using as launch pads. They're moving them, about a half dozen of them, toward the island of Diego Garcia, where of course the U.S. is prepared to attack Iran, and they are attacking the Houthis from there with their B-2 bombers and their various other instruments of warfare. And like he told me, he said, Sungdan, he said, you wouldn't even believe it's like out of science fiction what's there. And so Iran, he laughs at them because he said they're laughable. They're military. They're like in the Stone Age, putting these container ships and trying to make them to launch pads, steaming towards Diego Garcia to do what they can. He said they've got to be stopped. They've got one shot to do it, but they will be, believe me, they will be thwarted. So anyway, what he said that they've had intel for 9 months that this has been going on, but now we're allowed to talk about it because 2 days ago it hit social media what Iran has been doing. And once it hits social media, it's a story that's out there, then I'm allowed to say something about it. Like I said, he tells me stuff all the time, and I always ask him, can I say this? And I will not say anything unless he tells me I can. He gave me the okay today. He said, yeah, this one's okay. You can go ahead and talk about it. So we will talk about it. And so Iran is doing what it can in so many ways, but basically with no real navy, no real air force, as it were. Iran is not in a good position at all. What they do have and what they're working on, of course, is the missiles, the ones that can hit the drones. They have produced a lot of those that can hit Israel, that can hit Europe. And this is why they need to be taken out of the picture. So we will see how that goes, and we'll keep an eye on something like that. Now, this last story, again, is not surprising given the world we're living in, the world, again, that the Bible talks about at the time of the end, where there'll be control by the final Antichrist and his cohort, the false prophet, to be able to control the whole world to the degree that no one can buy or sell without his mark on the right hand or the forehead. Now, that has to be something that takes time to do. It doesn't happen overnight, and more government control. Here's an example of this. German journalist given 7-month sentence for meme mocking government's hatred of free speech. Germany has been accused of violating basic Western values yet again as a news editor in Germany faces a hefty fine and a 7-month prison sentence for posting a meme mocking the government's hatred of free speech. The Bamberg District Court in Bavaria sentenced Deutschland Courier editor David Bendels this week to 7 months in prison on probation and a fine of nearly 60% of his annual income, or 210 daily rates, it's called, for posting an image on social media of Interior Minister Nancy Fraser holding an altered sign. The common meme tactic of changing the words on a sign held by politicians for satirical purposes was used to make Fraser's sign read, I hate freedom of speech. Okay, that's the meme. That's the satirical reason he did this. Bendels was initially convicted in November, and the ruling was confirmed on Monday, 2 days ago, finding that he had committed, quote, defamation directed against people and political life. Die Welt, that's one of the periodicals there in Deutschland, reported on Tuesday. This, according to Bendels, is the first time in the history of the Federal Republic of Germany that a journalist has been threatened with prison for breaching that statute. Sounds like we're back in 1939 in Germany, don't we? It would be with Hitler and the Nazis as they took over and they, suppressed free speech and the such like. Anyway, the Courier editor also claimed that the prosecution was prompted after Interior Minister Faeser personally filed a complaint against him. He said he plans to appeal the ruling. We will not accept the verdict and will defend ourselves against it using all legal means. And he said, I will personally continue my struggle for freedom of the press and freedom of expression, which is indispensable for the continued existence of democracy in Germany, resolutely, stably, and with all consistency. Now, the ruling has also been criticized actually by opposition political figures. Nobody likes this ruling, it seems, because it's chilling because it's basically stopping free speech and again with the threat of jail. And like Donald Trump and Elon Musk have said, the enemies of freedom are found within the EU governments. It's very sad. So anyway, it says if we don't stop this disastrous development, the journey one day will end in a left-green dictatorship of wokeness. Instead of swastika flags, rainbow flags will fall on all public buildings and places in Germany. So instead of the swastikas from the Third Reich in the 1930s, there'll be rainbow flags. And basically, they will be flying in public buildings, which means you better keep your mouth shut. And so it's sad. But again, like we've said, this is one of the things we come to expect when we see what the Bible says the world will be like in the last days, particularly that the final Antichrist can control the whole population, could buy or sell without the mark, that they can make a decree that everyone must do this worldwide and the people must follow this. And so we're moving towards that. Again, it doesn't happen overnight, but we've seen it happen in China. We're seeing it happen in Europe, and it'll happen more and more in various places around the world. Again, you want to check out our book, The Final Antichrist, The Coming Caesar. We deal with this in great detail. And also our book, 25 Signs We're Near the End, where we talk about the world is looking for a leader, desperately looking for a leader, while globalism takes over the world and a 10-nation confederation rises out of Western Europe. That'll be the foundation of the last days rise of this final world dictator, world leader, the coming Caesar, the final Antichrist. Again, they're from our website, Educating Our World. They're all free, a free download, so please take advantage of them. Well, wow, so much still happening. Every single day, every single hour, we have more and more stories. Like we said today, we couldn't even get to all of them. There's so many of them. But the bottom line is everything's going according to God's plan. We know where the world's headed. It's not a very pretty place, but eventually it will be. But in the meantime, keep our eyes peeled on the headlines and we'll keep letting you know what's going on and we'll keep trusting the Lord. But the main thing is we'll keep preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ and getting the word of God out to the world, that all this has been predicted. So we're not surprised by any of it because we know how the whole thing is going to end. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.